It is said that before names hardened into legend, the world held its stories the way the sea holds its deepest currents, without explanation, without apology, without haste. In forgotten corners of the earth, where memory fades into salt and wind, there's a shore that does not belong to any map. It lies beneath a sky the color of old bronze, dusted with starlight, so fine it seems like breath. The ocean there is not loud. It does not argue with the land. It only rises and falls as if sleeping slowly, patiently, like a great animal curled beneath the moon. Beneath that silence, a doorway of stone opens into a chamber polished smooth by time no one counted. No banners hang, no footsteps echo, only the hush of cool rock and the faint taste of metal in the air, as though the world itself has been forged and left to cool. At the center of that chamber rests a vessel, sealed, unmarked, unclaimed by any clear meaning. It does not glitter like treasure. It does not announce itself as important. It simply waits, the way a closed eye waits, the way a locked gate waits, the way a question waits when no one is ready to answer. And so the first question is not, what is inside? The first question is softer, and perhaps more dangerous. Why was a gift shaped like a warning? Whispers tell us that this is where the story began, not with the opening, not with the spilling, but with the careful making of a boundary. Some believe the gods do not always punish with thunder. Sometimes they punish with beauty. Sometimes they punish with something small enough to hold, light enough to carry, gentle enough to be mistaken for mercy. So we drift backward, as if floating on a current beneath the tail. We return to an older silence, to the moment a stolen flame changed the weight of the air. It is said that Prometheus, friend of mortals, defier of sky, brought fire down into human hands, not a spectacle, but as a quiet act of devotion. Fire meant warmth where nights were cruel. Fire meant light where caves had swallowed the sun. Fire meant the beginning of craft and bread and story and the long, shimmering hunger to know more. And every stolen light, even the smallest, draws a thin thread behind it, a gleaming thread of consequence. Zeus does not roar in this telling. He does not hurl the sky. He only closes his hand. A punishment need not shout to be final. In the soft half-dark of divine halls, the gods gather like distant constellations, present, immense, unreadable. Their faces are not the faces of humans. Their minds are not the minds of those who bruise easily. They watch the mortal world as one might watch candle flame and wind, beautiful, fragile, always nearing the edge. And in that watchful quiet, a plan is folded into beauty. Pandora is formed, not as a villain, not as a monster, not as a storm sent to ruin. She is shaped as a sentence written in living breath, each gift laid upon her like a veil. Grace, charm, music, curiosity, that soft turning of the mind toward doors. Some say she was made to undo humankind. Others say she was made to complete it. And this is where the mist of contradiction begins to rise. Because what is a punishment? Truly, if it arrives wrapped like a blessing. What is a gift? If it carries an edge that only reveals itself after the hand is closed around it. The vessel, this sealed mouth of clay or bronze or stone, becomes the center of the ritual. The story turns its gaze toward the object, as if the object is the real protagonist, silent, patient, impossible to read. Was it truly a box? Later voices call it so, as if the world prefers straight corners and neat lids. But older echoes suggest something more ordinary, and therefore more terrifying, ajar, wide-mouthed, domestic, the kind of thing that might sit in a storeroom beside grain and oil, the kind of thing a home would not fear until it learns it should. A jar is not a jeweled chest. A jar is intimate. A jar belongs near bread, near water, near the daily rituals that keep life alive. And so if the unknown was placed in a jar, it means the unknown was placed inside the ordinary. It means the gate was set in the middle of the home. Beneath the silence, the vessel seems to breathe with its own closed breath. Its seal is a thin horizon. Its lid is a moon resting against a mouth. It is a promise. It is a warning. It is a small, portable doorway. And perhaps that is the most unsettling part. The most dangerous doors are not the ones guarded by armies. They are the ones we can hold in our hands. It is said that the vessel was carried away through moonlit dust, through corridors of stone, where shadows gather like prayers. No one sees who carries it. No one hears footsteps. The only sound is the slow drift of time, the soft settling of ash-like silence. And the world, still young, still half innocent, does not yet know what it is about to learn. We end here, before the opening, before the wind of sorrows finds its wings, before the word hope becomes a question. We end with the vessel moving farther into night, its sealed mouth still closed, its meaning still veiled. Perhaps it was never meant to be understood. Perhaps it was only meant to be held. And some voices, it seems, only echo when we are ready to listen. It is said that some gifts do not arrive like blessings. They arrive like ceremonies, wrapped carefully, carried slowly, offered with hands that never tremble, even when the world beneath them is already fragile. Where memory fades, there is a corridor lined with cypress shadows, their tall bodies rising like dark prayers against a dust-blue sky. The air is cool there, and it tastes faintly of stone and sea salt, and something older, something like bronze left too long in moonlight. In that corridor, a quiet procession moves without hurry. Pandora walks as though each step is a vow, not the kind spoken aloud, but the kind pressed into the earth through careful feet. Her pace is measured, meditative, as if she is listening to the ground for permission. Around her, the silence is not empty. It is gathered. It clings to the pillars and the roots and the broken edges of old carvings, as though the world is holding its breath. And in her hands rests the vessel. It is not heavy, yet the air around it changes subtly, as if the jar has a gravity of its own, drawing attention without sound, bending stillness into shape. The vessel is veiled in thin gold cloth that catches the last light of day. Soft and warm, like a secret given a shimmer, so it will be welcomed. Marked by the moon, the gold does not feel celebratory. It feels deliberate. The first image is intimate, fingers hovering above the seal. Not touching, not yet. A pause so gentle it could be mistaken for reverence. The seal is wax dark, pressed with a star-marked imprint, an insignia that does not belong to any mortal house. Pandora's hand lingers above it, as if she can feel heat through clay, as if something forbidden is breathing quietly behind that thin wall. Whispers tell us that this is what the gods do when they do not wish to speak plainly. They pour meaning into objects. They stitch consequence into beauty. Pandora herself is such a stitching. Some believe she is less a person and more a threshold, an opening between worlds, shaped with care. The gods have poured into her a strange harmony, grace that makes rooms soften, sweetness that makes voices trust her, music that seems to follow her like a veil of sound. And beneath those gifts, something else, a blade no one can see, not a blade of metal, a blade of intention. The mystery settles into the heart like cool water. Why would something so luminous be sent to a world that is already tender, already breakable, already learning to carry sorrow? In forgotten corners of the earth, the old myths answer questions without fully answering them. They speak in symbols and half-lights, in offerings that arrive with shadows stitched inside. A gift is never only a gift. A gift is a message. A gift is a test. A gift is the kind of door that looks like a decoration until it opens. So we follow Pandora, slowly, through sacred logic. We watch her move through halls where pillars rise like sleeping giants. We pass broken statues whose faces have been softened by centuries of wind, as if even stone has learned to forget. We see scrolls scattered like shed skins of knowledge, ink faded, edges crumbling, truths turning back into dust. And always the vessel remains at the center. It becomes more than an object. It becomes a symbol of the human interior, a chamber where want, fear, and wonder sleep together in the dark, curled like animals in the same den. Beneath the silence, The old word whispers changed shape. Later voices insisted it was a box, a thing with corners and neat boundaries, a treasure chest of disaster. But earlier echoes suggest something different, something domestic, ordinary, and therefore more unsettling. A jar, a pithos, wide mouth, the kind of vessel a household uses to store grain, to keep water cool, to preserve life through dry seasons. Not a royal container, not a jewel trap, a domestic throat, standing quietly in the corner of daily living. And the shift in shape changes the meaning, because a box suggests distant treasure. A jar suggests intimacy. A jar suggests that the unknown was placed near bread, near firelight, near sleeping children, that the boundary between safety and consequence was set inside the home, not outside it. Through meditative images, we feel Pandora's curiosity not as a flaw, but as a tide. It comes in quietly. It does not announce itself. It simply returns again and again, lapping at the seal. Some believe curiosity is not disobedience. It is the soul's way of touching the edge of the veil, asking what lies beyond it. And perhaps the gods knew this. Perhaps they did not merely punish humanity. Perhaps they planted a mirror inside it. A mirror that would reflect every hidden longing, every hunger to know, every secret wish to open what is sealed. And so Pandora arrives at a threshold, a doorway framed by stone worn smooth, as if countless unseen hands have passed through it. Inside, the room is small and quiet. A lamp burns low, its flame steady, its light warm and patient. The vessel is placed near that flame. The gold veil catches the lamp's glow and becomes softer, almost tender, like the curve of a smile that hides a sharp truth. Pandora stands still. Her hands hover once more. The air is filled with that sacred pause, the moment before choice becomes history. And in that pause, the listener can feel it. Longing itself is a spell, not shouted, not forced. A spell that moves like breath. A spell no one can fully refuse. We do not open the vessel here. We only sit beside it, near the lamp's low flame, and listen to the silence that gathers around sealed things. Perhaps it was never meant to be resisted. Perhaps it was never meant to be understood. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. It is said that the version most often told is the one that survives the longest, not because it is whole, but because it is soft enough to be carried, like a warm coal wrapped in cloth, passed from hand to hand through the centuries, never quite burning, never quite going out. Where memory fades, there is a room lit by a single flame. Outside, the world sleeps beneath a sky of dust-blue silence. Inside, a scroll lies open on stone, its edges worn as if it has been touched by many winters. The ink upon it seems old, and yet, beneath the lamp's low breath, it almost appears to move. Whispers tell us that stories can breathe, that they shift when no one is watching, that the words we repeat become a kind of vessel, sealed by habit, polished by retelling, and sometimes changed by the gentle pressure of fear. A page lifts slightly, as if turned by an unseen wind, and there it is, the familiar name, softened by repetition. Pandora, the box, the sudden spilling of sorrows. Beneath the silence, the tale begins as it always does, like a chant spoken near firelight while the night listens. Yet even as the story forms, there is a hush between the words, a quiet space where something older seems to wait, because the version most often told is rarely the whole one. Some believe the myth is not a single door, but a corridor of doors, each age adding a new lock, each storyteller leaving fingerprints of their own time. And so, we move through the well-known sequence slowly, as if walking through a temple where every pillar carries a secret. Marked by the moon, the vessel sits in a chamber of stone. Sometimes it is called a box, neat and simple, as though danger prefers corners. Sometimes, if we listen for older echoes, it is a jar, pithos, wide-mouthed and domestic, like the kind that stores grain and water in quiet homes. The difference matters softly, like a change in prayer. A box suggests treasure. A jar suggests daily life. A jar suggests that what escaped was never meant to be distant. It was meant to live near the hearth, near bread, near sleeping breath. In the most often told version, Pandora lifts the lid, and a black wind rises. Not a storm that shatters roofs. No, nothing so dramatic. This is a quieter terror. It is said the darkness moved like smoke, like ink spilled into water, spreading without sound. Sickness, grief, hunger, envy, unseen wings beating through the room, brushing against walls, slipping through cracks, finding their way into the world's tender places. But there are no screams in this telling, no thunder, only the subtle dimming of the world's first innocence. A change so gentle it might be missed at first, like the moment a lamp's flame grows smaller and no one notices until the room feels colder. Some believe this is the truest horror of the myth, not chaos, but the loss of ease, not destruction, but the slow arrival of weight. And then, like a soft turning of the head, the chapter leans toward its deeper contradiction. If the evils were inside the vessel, what does that say about the world before? Was humanity truly untouched, or simply unaware? Perhaps the sorrows did not begin at the opening, but at the realizing. Perhaps they were always possible, sleeping like seeds in the dark soil of mortal life, waiting for a story to give them a name. And then there's the quietest detail of all. When all darkness escapes, something remains at the bottom, faint as a moth resting in a jar. Hope, not bright hope, not triumphant hope, only a small presence, a soft glimmer clinging to the last shadow, as if it does not know whether it should leave. This is where the myth fractures like old stone. Did hope stay trapped as a final cruelty, sealed away so mortals would reach for it and never quite touch it? Or did hope remain as a mercy, preserved from the storm, kept safe so it could glow when the world grew dim? The old voices do not agree, and the ambiguity lingers like dew on stone, cool and unresolved. We return slowly to the chamber. The lamp is low. The air is thick with quiet aftermath. Pandora, whether we imagine her as a woman of breath and bone, or as a symbol shaped by divine hands, listens to the vessel's last faint exhale. No more wings, no more rising smoke, only the jar open-mouthed, holding a silence that feels almost alive. And the listener is left with sacred uncertainty, because hope can be a lantern, and hope can also be a veil. Perhaps it was never meant to be explained. Perhaps it was only meant to be carried, small, trembling, and unfinished, into the dark. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. It is said that the moment after is often quieter than the moment before, not because nothing happens, but because everything has already changed, and the world is learning how to breathe inside its new shape. Where memory fades, there's a room made of polished stone. The walls are the same walls. The pillars still stand in their ancient places. The lamp still burns low, though its flame seems smaller, as if it has heard something it cannot forget. And yet the air is shifted, like a hymn sung slightly off-key, close enough to be familiar, different enough to make the soul turn its head. On the floor, the vessel sits open. Its mouth is a dark circle, a small eclipse laid gently on stone. No thunder surrounds it. No spectacle lingers. Only the quiet fact of it, an opening that cannot be unseen. Pandora is there too, not as a storm, not as a dramatic figure carved in sharp emotion. Her face is still, not empty, only listening, as if she is learning what it means to be the first to witness a new world. And the opening question is not shouted. It is whispered, as though the room itself is asking, what does regret sound like when it has nowhere to go? Some believe regret is loud, that it arrives like crying, like breaking, like pleading. But in this chamber, regret is a silence that settles. It rests on the tongue. It clings to the ribs. It becomes a thin coldness in the air, barely visible, like breath on glass. Beneath the silence, the aftermath stretches out, not as a single event, but as a landscape. The evils do not rush. They do not stampede. They simply drift and then settle. The way dust settles after a door has been opened in a long-closed room. They hide in corners, in lungs, in grain stores, in marriages, in kings' decisions. They seep into the ordinary places, the domestic chambers where life is supposed to be simple, where bread is baked, where children sleep, where the day's work ends and the lamp is lowered. This is the myth's quiet terror, not chaos, but intimacy. Not destruction, but presence. And yet, here is the subtle mystery that hums beneath the story like a buried drumbeat. If all sorrows escaped at once, why do they arrive in human life like seasons? One after another, returning in cycles. Hunger does not strike every day. It comes, then leaves, then comes again. Grief does not live in every hour. It visits, retreats, returns, sometimes with new faces. Envy rises, fades, rises again. Sickness appears, vanishes, reappears. It is said that myth speaks in single gestures to describe 1,000 quiet hours. That one opened lid can stand in for generations of slow, weather inside the human heart. A single act becomes a symbol for the repeating rhythm of being alive. Some believe the jar was never meant to explain a moment. It was meant to explain a pattern. So the chapter deepens. We move from the room into Pandora's inner chamber, where the true turning may have begun long before the lid lifted. Curiosity is not merely a trait here. It becomes a symbol of the mind's hunger for doors, the desire to touch what is sealed, to know what is hidden, to lean toward the veil and ask softly, insistently, what lies behind it. Beneath the silence, the vessel begins to resemble something else. Not a container of evils, a mirror of the human interior. A heart, opened once, never fully sealed again. Because even if a lid is placed back, the air has already mixed. The chamber has already been entered. The innocence has already been altered. And yet, there is the faint shimmer of starlight. Hope, still present, still disputed. It is said that when Pandora realized what had happened, she moved without hurry. Her hands found the lid again, as if guided by prayer. She lowered it, perhaps quickly, perhaps too late, perhaps just in time for one small thing to remain. But the old voices do not agree on what this means. Did Pandora close the lid fast enough to trap hope inside, leaving humanity to suffer while hope sits unreachable at the bottom like a locked lantern? Or did hope choose to remain, not trapped but hiding, like a small creature sheltering from wind, a quiet ember waiting for the storm to pass? The ambiguity rests on the story, like dew on stone, cool, unresolved, sacred. And here, the engagement arrives as implied forbidden knowledge. Some believe the gods did not fear the evils escaping. Perhaps they feared what humanity might become without them. Without pain, would mortals remain shallow, unmarked, untested, untempered? Without sorrow, would compassion ever be born? Without hunger, would gratitude ever develop its roots? Without grief, would love ever lure its depth? It is a dangerous thought, spoken only in whispers, that suffering, once released, becomes part of the shaping of the soul. Not because it is good, but because it is real. And realities change us. We return again to the room. The lamp is low. Moonlight has entered through a high crack in the stone, laying a pale ribbon across the floor. Dust rises in slow spirals, like incense offered to no-named god. Pandora sits in that moonlit dust. She does not plead. She does not shout. She listens, as though she can hear, at the bottom of the vessel, something small and living, something that breathes faintly, something that does not belong to darkness, and yet rests within it. And the silence feels like a sacred lesson, not yet translated. Perhaps it was never meant to be solved. Perhaps it was only meant to be carried. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. It is said that some mysteries are not hidden by walls, but by words. Where memory fades, there's a room that feels like a museum and a dream at the same time. The air is cool and careful. The silence is polished, as if touched by many quiet hours. A single lamp glows with a strange, diffused light, blue as deep water, so that even stone seems to drift. In the center of that hush sits a clay jar, not a jeweled chest, not a tidy box with corners. A jar tall, wide-mouthed, worn smooth by time and handling. Its surface holds small scars, hairline cracks like dried riverbeds, faint scratches like star marks pressed by careless centuries. It does not ask to be admired. It simply exists, patient and ordinary, as though it has been waiting for someone to notice the shape of the truth. Whispers tell us that this is where the myth shifts. not in the opening of the vessel, but in the naming of it, because the earliest tellings did not speak of a box. They spoke of a pithos, a jar, and the correction is a soft blade, quiet, precise, cutting through the comfortable picture we have carried for so long. How did the shape of the vessel change the shape of the myth? Some believe myths are like rivers. They keep their source, but their banks change with every land they pass. And translation is a kind of landscape. A word steps into another language the way a traveler steps into a new city. Dust on sandals, breath in unfamiliar air, meaning shifting slightly with every doorway crossed. A jar is not a treasure chest. A jar belongs to kitchens, storerooms, ordinary hands. It carries grain, oil, water, life itself. It stands beside the hearth where bread is baked. It rests in the corner where families store what will keep them alive through dry seasons. It is domestic. It is humble. It is near the daily rituals that make a world feel safe. And so, if evils were stored in a jar, the myth is no longer about a rare object delivered from the heavens like an exotic curse. It becomes something far more intimate. It becomes a story about the domestic heart of humanity, where survival and sorrow share the same shelf. Beneath the silence, we drift through the veil of time. We feel the centuries as thin layers of dust settling on a single idea. We imagine old storytellers by firelight, repeating the tale in softened voices. We imagine scribes copying lines onto parchment, their ink dark and steady. We imagine later readers, scholars in bright rooms, pausing over unfamiliar Greek, choosing the nearest word they can offer, smoothing rough edges into something easier to hold. And somewhere in that long passage, the jar becomes a box. Perhaps it was an honest mistake. Perhaps it was the mind's desire for neatness, because a box is simpler to picture, simpler to frame. Some believe it was the Renaissance that helped seal this new image into the world's imagination. Painters and poets drawn to ornate objects, to chests with gilded corners, to the drama of a lid thrown open. A box makes the story feel theatrical, distant, almost like a moral play on a stage. But the jar is older, stranger, more unsettling, because the jar can be resealed. A jar can be carried. A jar can be mistaken for something harmless. A jar can sit quietly among water vessels and grain stores, looking like nothing at all, until the moment it is not. Symbolism rises gently, like smoke from a low flame. The lid becomes a threshold. The mouth becomes a gate. Storage becomes fate. And the home, once imagined as shelter, becomes the place where the unknown can live, unseen, beside ordinary life. In forgotten corners of the earth, the most dangerous things are rarely guarded by monsters. They are guarded by familiarity. They hide in plain sight, wrapped in the softness of daily routine. This is the quiet, forbidden knowledge the chapter offers, that we may have been told a simplified version, so the real one could remain sleeping. Because a box lets us keep the myth at arm's length. A jar brings it into the kitchen, into the pantry, into the room where children breathe in the dark. It brings the story close enough to feel. And perhaps that closeness is what unsettles us most. We return to the clay jar in the museum like hush. The underwater light trembles faintly, as if the air itself is remembering. The bronze-winged owl, silent, watchful, tilts its head, as though listening to the jar's ancient breath. And in the final image, there's a hand that does not quite arrive. A shadow hovering over clay. A pause held like prayer. Not touching, not opening, only hovering, because some truths are too heavy to lift all at once. We are left with a soft melancholy, that even myths can be altered, and the truth can change shape without changing its ache. Perhaps it was never meant to be neat. Perhaps it was never meant to be a box at all. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. It is said that the loudest power is not always the deepest. Where memory fades, and the sky becomes a dark temple scattered with starlight, there is an image that does not roar. Zeus stands alone beneath the constellations. Though stands may be the wrong word, because in this telling we do not see his muscles, his lightning, his famous storms. We only feel him the way one feels a mountain at night. Present, unmoving, beyond argument. He is not raging. He is not hurling thunder. He is simply watching. And the mystery is immediate and quietly unsettling. What kind of power prefers patience over noise? Beneath the silence, the scene feels like a sacred court with no verdict spoken aloud. The air is still. The stars hang like witnesses who will never testify. Even the wind seems careful, as if it does not wish to interrupt the moment when fate is being drafted. Some believe Zeus is not merely a god of force. They believe he is an architect of consequence, a builder of outcomes, a designer who lays foundations so thoroughly that later generations will call them destiny. And in this myth, the turning point is often placed in mortal hands: Pandora, curiosity, the lifted lid. But if we step back slowly, as if walking backward through a corridor of pillars, the focus shifts. It shifts toward the quiet mind behind the design. Prometheus has stolen fire, humanity's first bright disobedience. A small flame, carried down like a secret star. It warms the hands that used to tremble in darkness. It changes the shape of nights. It teaches mortals to cook, to forge, to gather, to build. And with fire comes a new hunger, not only for warmth, for knowledge, for more. It is said that Zeus does not answer this theft with immediate destruction. He does not crush the world. He does not drown it. He closes his hand, slowly, carefully, and lets the consequences form. A punishment need not be violent to be complete. Sometimes it is elegant. Sometimes it arrives wrapped in beauty. Sometimes it requires a human hand to finish it. So the gift is made, not in rage, but in quiet craftsmanship, layer by layer, like a sealed chamber within a sealed chamber. Grace is placed upon it. Charm, wonder, longing, a softness that makes it easy to approach. And then, at the center, the vessel, silent, domestic, mistaken for harmlessness. Some believe this is the cruel genius of the design, that the trap does not spring by itself. The trap waits for someone to touch it with sincerity, to open it with a human reason, to complete the story with a mortal choice. The chapter deepens into a spiritual undercurrent that ancient Greece carried like a hidden ache. The anxiety of boundaries, mortal and immortal, seen and unseen, permitted and forbidden, a line drawn in the dust, and the warning that crossing it changes everything. The gods were not only feared for their storms, they were feared for their rules, the invisible lines that shaped life. And perhaps the myths were built to explain why those lines exist, and why they feel so sharp. Pandora, in this light, becomes less an individual and more a ritual object in Zeus's plan, a veil placed over a lesson the gods refused to teach directly. And here, beneath the silence, a quieter thought appears, one that feels almost like forbidden knowledge. Perhaps the myth is not truly about curiosity. Perhaps it is about how authority manufactures blame, because the story, as it is often repeated, places the weight on the visible hand, on Pandora, on the moment of opening, on the weakness of wanting to know. But Zeus, the one who arranged the conditions, remains above judgment, like the sky itself. Whispers tell us that this is how power often moves through history, not by acting openly, but by arranging the room so someone else will be blamed for what the room was built to do. And then there is the contradiction that hums like a distant drumbeat. If Zeus is all-knowing, then Pandora's opening is not an accident. It is a line in the script, a measured moment, placed carefully, waiting. And if it is scripted, what does free will mean inside a story written by the sky? Some believe mortals are free the way a river is free, able to flow, able to curve, able to glitter in sunlight, yet always guided by banks carved long before it arrived. Perhaps Pandora chose. Perhaps she did not. Perhaps the choice itself was part of the design. We return to the star-dusted sky. Zeus's presence is felt again, not loud, not triumphant, only vast. Clouds begin to gather, soft as ash, drifting across the constellations. The witness is dim. The chord dissolves without a word, and Zeus's gaze fades into cloud. No verdict spoken, no thunder thrown, only the quiet sensation that something has been set into motion, because the most powerful forces in history often move without sound. and their designs feel like fate only after the door has already opened. Perhaps it was never meant to be stopped. Perhaps it was only meant to be understood, too late, in the aftermath, when the pattern is already woven. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. It is said that if you wish to find the most delicate truth in a myth, you do not search the sky. You listen to the bottom. Where memory fades, there is a vessel resting in a chamber of stone. The room is quiet in the way ancient rooms are quiet, still holding the shape of old breath, still remembering footsteps that no longer come. The jar stands there, tall and ordinary, its mouth like a small eclipse. And if we lean close, if we let our listening become slow enough to match the night, there is something down within it. Not a voice, not a scream, only a faint glimmer trembling in near darkness, like a trapped firefly, a breath of starlight pressed against clay. This is where the chapter begins, at the bottom of the vessel, where the world's noise cannot reach. We begin with the softest mystery of all. Hope, not the loud kind that marches like drums, not the triumphant kind that lifts banners and demands certainty, but a quiet presence, a small light that refuses clear interpretation, as if it knows that clarity can be its own kind of cruelty. Whispers tell us that the oldest arguments about hope move like slow waves. They do not crash. They do not settle quickly. They return again and again, touching the same shore, leaving the same question wet on the sand. If hope remained inside the jar, what does that mean? Some believe it is mercy, a last blessing preserved from the storm, kept safe, held back, so it would not be torn apart by the same wind that carried sorrow into the world. A small lantern guarded by clay, a spark saved for the darkest hour. Others believe it is cruelty, a final withholding, a lid lowered too soon, a light trapped at the bottom while humanity stumbles above in hunger and grief, reaching, always reaching, for glow it cannot quite touch. Ancient voices do not agree, and the contradiction becomes the chapter's sacred heart, because hope can be read in two ways, and both readings feel true, depending on the night you are living through. In forgotten corners of the earth, people have spoken of hope as comfort, a warmth in the chest when winter is long, a soft whisper that tomorrow might carry water, or bread, or a letter from someone still alive. But people have also spoken of hope as deception, a sweetness that keeps the suffering walking in circles, a veil that covers the harsh edge of reality, making it bearable and therefore endless. Beneath the silence, we guide the listener through these possibilities gently, as if walking around a small flame without blowing it out. Hope is comfort. Hope is illusion. Hope is endurance. Hope is the last chain. And perhaps the most honest version is the one that refuses to choose. Because hope, in real human chambers, is rarely pure. It behaves like weather. It shifts. It thins. It returns. We linger on it not as an idea, but as something lived. Hope appears in famine, not as fullness, but as the decision to keep searching for grain. Hope appears in illness, not as healing, but as the refusal to stop breathing when breath feels heavy. Hope appears in exile, not as homecoming, but as the act of carrying a name across deserts and borders, keeping it unbroken. Hope appears in long winters of the spirit, not as joy, but as the small, stubborn ember that stays alive under ash. It is said that sometimes hope is not warm at all. Sometimes it is simply motion. One step, then another, a continuation without promise. And this is where the myth's object becomes a mirror again. Perhaps hope is not a gift. Perhaps it is a mechanism, a hidden hinge in the human soul that keeps it opening toward morning, even when morning offers very little. A quiet device of survival. The lid becomes a horizon in our mind, half light, half shadow. The bottom of the jar becomes a womb, dark, enclosed, patient. And hope becomes a seed that can survive darkness. Not because darkness is kind, but because seeds are made for burial. Engagement rises here as subtle forbidden knowledge. Hope may not be good or bad. It may be necessary, like thirst, like hunger, like the pulse that continues even when the heart is tired. Some believe the gods understood this, that they did not leave hope behind by accident. They left it because without it, The human story might have ended too quickly, too cleanly, too quietly, and perhaps they wanted it to continue. Not as a celebration, as a lesson, as a long unfolding. We return slowly to the jar. The chamber is still. The air is calm. The darkness inside the vessel no longer stirs. And yet the small light remains, humming softly in its sealed chamber, faint as starlight through cloud, steady as breath and sleep. We do not decide whether it is mercy or cruelty. We simply witness that it is there. Perhaps it was never meant to be solved. Perhaps it was never meant to be freed or trapped. Perhaps it was only meant to remain, small, unresolved, and quietly alive. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. It is said that the gods do not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes they arrive like a change in air, so quiet that the body feels it before the mind can name it. Where memory fades, there is an ordinary home made of stone and clay, its walls warmed by years of breath. The roof beams hold the scent of smoke. The floor remembers bare feet. The world inside is domestic and gentle, small rituals performed without ceremony. Bread cools on a wooden board. Water settles in a bowl, its surface smoothing itself like a lake after wind. A child sleeps beneath a thin blanket, the rise and fall of that breath as steady as tide. A lamp burns low near the hearth, and its flame wavers softly, as if listening. And then, almost imperceptibly, the room changes. Not in a way that breaks anything, not in a way that shouts, only as a hymn shifts when one note is held too long. A quiet misalignment, a thin shadow where there was none. The opening question is whispered, as though spoken by the dust itself. How do myths enter daily life without knocking? Some believe the story of Pandora was not felt as a grand event, not as a single dramatic moment when the world cracked open, but as a slow arrival of new truths, moving through villages and homes the way dusk moves across fields, steadily, silently, without asking permission. It is said that first came sickness, something unfamiliar, like a new kind of cold settling into lungs. Not a monster, not a visible enemy, only the body turning strange, the breath shortening, the skin losing its ease. Then came jealousy, learning its own name, a feeling that used to pass like a cloud now lingering, now sharpening into a habit of looking sideways, of measuring one life against another. A quiet ache that could sit at the table beside bread and stillness. Then came grief, becoming a familiar visitor. Not a screaming figure at the door. A presence that enters without sound, sits in the corner near the lamp, and stays longer than expected. It is said grief teaches the home new silences, pauses between words, longer evenings, empty places where laughter used to rest. And so the chapter's focus becomes the household itself. This humble chamber where history's invisible forces take residence, because the home is not merely shelter. It is a sacred vessel. It is where the world's great movements finally settle into the smallest objects, the bowl, the blanket, the threshold stone worn smooth. Beneath the silence, we begin to understand what ancient storytelling was meant to do. Myths were not merely entertainment. They were not designed only to pass the time. They were vessels themselves, carrying moral weather, carrying explanations too heavy to hold in plain daylight. When storms arrived that no spear could stop, when illness came without warning, when loss visited those who had done nothing to deserve it, the myth offered a shape to the confusion. Not certainty, a shape, a way to say, this is part of the fabric now. Pandora becomes, in this telling, an emblem of the threshold moment when humanity recognizes suffering as woven into life, not as a punishment that ends, but as a condition that continues. And yet the pacing remains soft. The evils are not monsters here. They are shadows that lengthen at dusk. They are the chill that arrives earlier than expected. They are the tiredness that settles into bones. They are the sudden awareness that joy, too, is fragile. Whispers tell us there is implied forbidden knowledge beneath the familiar version, that the gods may be less interested in justice than in balance, because justice would strike cleanly. Justice would name its target, but balance is different. Balance spreads. Balance settles into everything, like ash drifting through a room, touching bread and water and sleep alike. And there's another contradiction: quiet, persistent, never fully resolved. What is this myth truly criticizing? Women, curiosity, or divine politics, the invisible architecture of power that arranges consequences and then watches them unfold? Some believe the story was shaped by those who wanted blame to have a face, a scapegoat, a name, because it is easier to tell a child, "Do not open the lid," than to say, "The world is governed by forces that do not explain themselves." Symbolism moves gently through the home. The lid, resting near the jar like a fallen moon. The jar, standing in the corner like a second hearth, silent and domestic. The threshold, where outside becomes inside, where myths cross into daily life. The hearth, where warmth gathers, where the lamp is lit, where people try to make a small circle of safety in a wide, uncertain world. And still, the home remains standing. The bread is still bread. The water still settles. The child still sleeps. The lamp still burns. But something has entered, not as a knock, as an echo. We end in quiet melancholy, with a sense that every human life is a myth's aftersound, an echo moving gently through rooms of sleeping stone. Perhaps it was never meant to be escaped. Perhaps it was only meant to be lived, slowly, quietly, one breath at a time. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. It is said that every myth has a shadow, a second story beneath the first, quiet and older, moving like water under stone. Where memory fades, there is a moonlit archive hidden behind thick walls, as if the world has tried to forget what sleeps inside. The air is cool. The silence is careful. Scrolls rest in their niches like sleeping birds, wings folded, beaks tucked, waiting for dawn that never quite arrives. A lone lamp breathes at the edge of the room, and beneath its glow, dust rises in thin spirals, as if the past is exhaling. On a low table lies the opening symbol, a cracked tablet. Its missing pieces shape a mystery more than its remaining words. The broken edges speak softly, not in language, but in absence, suggesting that what is lost can sometimes be more powerful than what remains. Whispers tell us that this is how old stories survive. Not perfectly, not whole. They survive as fragments, carried, translated, recited, reshaped, until the gaps become part of the meaning. And so we begin to wonder, is Pandora's tale truly alone? Or is it one mask among many, borrowed, worn, passed on? Some believe myths travel the way rivers travel. They move across borders without asking permission. They pick up silt and names and local colors, and yet their water remains the same. They borrow faces. They change the music of their words. But beneath the surface, the same tremor continues to pulse. In forgotten corners of the earth, long before Greece carved its gods into marble, other cultures whispered about forbidden knowledge, about doors that should not be opened, about gifts that change the world's texture, about commands that sound simple: do not touch, do not look, do not lift the lid, and the quiet human longing that leans toward the forbidden anyway, not as a lecture, not as a list of dates, only as a slow recognition, like a lamp revealing dust in the air, that stories repeat because the human heart repeats. We drift gently toward the ancient Near East, toward older chambers of thought where tablets were pressed with reeds and fired into permanence. We do not name every tale. We only feel their presence like distant drums. Tales of gardens guarded, of hidden things, of knowledge given too soon, of boundaries crossed and consequences that spread like ink in water. And the mystery becomes sacred. Why do so many civilizations hold a story about a boundary crossed? Why does humanity repeatedly dream of a sealed thing, a hidden chamber, a mouth closed tight, a warning carved into stone? Some believe it is because the deepest fear is not death. It is irreversible knowing. Because once a door is opened, it cannot be unopened. Once a truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. Once the world changes shape inside the mind, it does not return to its earlier innocence. Pandora's vessel, box, or jar becomes one expression of a universal human tremor, the fear that knowledge cannot be unlearned. Beneath the silence, The archive seems to listen with us. Scrolls remain asleep. The cracked tablet holds its missing pieces like a secret smile. And engagement arises softly, not through spectacle, but through implied forbidden knowledge. That stories may have been shaped by cultural anxieties, by politics, by the need to explain suffering without accusing the sky directly. Because if suffering is random, the world becomes unbearable. But if suffering can be placed into a story, if it can be framed as the result of a boundary crossed, then the mind can rest, even in sadness. Some believe this is why myths so often seek a face to carry blame, a name, a figure who becomes the hinge of the tale. And here, historical contradiction steps forward like a shadow at dusk. Did Hesiod's version harden earlier whispers into a warning about women? Did later ages reshape the vessel, turning a jar into a box to suit their own moral architecture? Perhaps the myth is less a fixed artifact and more a living tool, adjusted by each era to teach what that era fears. Sometimes the lesson is about obedience. Sometimes it is about desire. Sometimes it is about power, and how power stays clean by placing consequence into mortal hands. The owl on the lectern watches without judgment, its constellation-speckled feathers catching moonlight. It does not speak. It only witnesses, like the archive itself, like history itself, holding all versions without choosing a favorite. And slowly, the lamp begins to dim. The room grows bluer. The scrolls remain closed. The cracked tablet remains unfinished. A hand rests on the edge of an open text, not turning the next page, only touching it, feeling the pulse of old ink beneath fingertips. We end with a silence that feels like a door left slightly open, not enough to step through, only enough to sense the air beyond it, inviting dreams to continue the research. Perhaps it was never meant to be proven. Perhaps it was only meant to be remembered, softly, imperfectly, in the quiet hours when the mind is willing to listen. Some voices only echo when we are ready. It is said that every story has a descent, not always into the earth, not always into shadowed caverns. Sometimes the descent is inward, down through the quiet floors of the human mind, where old innocence sleeps like a child beneath a thin blanket, and deeper knowing waits like a sealed chamber behind stone. Where memory fades, a spiral staircase coils downward into darkness. Each step is carved from ancient rock, worn smooth by invisible feet, generations of unseen travelers who have passed this way in silence. Dust lies in the grooves like soft ash. Star-marked scratches glint faintly on the stone, as if the night itself once touched these walls. The air is cool. The quiet is sacred. And the opening question is as simple as it is profound. Once the lid is lifted, what changes inside the one who lifted it? We begin not with thunder, but with a slow turning. At the top of the stairwell, the vessel rests open, its mouth a dark circle, calm and unblinking. The lid lies nearby like a fallen moon. No voices argue. No gods appear. Only the soft sensation that something has entered the world, and that something has also entered the mind. Some believe Pandora should be blamed, but this chapter does not move toward blame. It moves toward awakening, because in forgotten corners of the earth, the first person to open a door is often not a villain. Often, they are the first to learn what a door truly is. Before the vessel, life may have been simpler, brighter, and perhaps more shallow, like water that has never known depth. The days may have carried fewer shadows. The nights may have felt less heavy. Pain existed, perhaps, but it had not yet become an atmosphere. Sorrow visited, perhaps, but it had not yet learned the pathways into every room. Then the lid was lifted, and the world gained weight. Not the kind of weight that crushes instantly, but the kind that settles slowly, like dusk settling over stone. Humanity inherited complexity, the knowledge of loss, the ache of time, the awareness that joy and sorrow share the same cup. It is said that once you have seen darkness, light changes its meaning. It becomes more precious, more fragile, more real. We descend one step at a time, the pacing gentle, never urgent. The staircase becomes a ritual, each step a breath, each breath a soft turning of the soul. The deeper we go, the more the jar begins to feel like a threshold object, not merely a container of evils, but a symbolic gate. The moment the human mind becomes fully human, capable of regret, capable of compassion, capable of endurance. Regret, because innocence, once gone, cannot be recovered like a dropped coin. Compassion, because suffering, once recognized, creates a bridge between hearts. Endurance, because the world, once complicated, requires the slow strength of continuing. And here the myth offers a quiet reversal, as subtle as moonlight on water. Perhaps the punishment is also an initiation. Perhaps the gods did not merely wound humanity. Perhaps they made it deep. Not because pain is a gift, but because depth is what pain can carve. Some believe the gods feared humanity's fire not only because it warmed hands, but because it awakened minds. And awakened minds ask questions. They lean toward veils. They touch the edges of forbidden things. So the myth becomes a ceremony of becoming. Breath becomes prayer, slower, heavier, more conscious. Dust becomes history, settling on the shoulders of generations. Starlight becomes memory, because even the sky, once seen through suffering, feels different, not merely beautiful, but distant and silent and full of unanswered design. Hope is present again, faintly, either trapped at the bottom of the vessel, or preserved like an ember, or simply born in the very moment suffering became known, because the human heart, when faced with darkness, often creates its own small lamp. Hope, in this chapter, does not shout. It trembles. It lingers at the edge of thought, like a quiet firefly that refuses to go out. We descend further. The steps narrow. The air grows stiller. And somewhere along the spiral, the listener may feel it. The shift from innocence to understanding is not a fall. It is a transformation. Understanding brings beauty, and it brings weight. Beauty, because the world's tenderness becomes visible. Weight, because tenderness can be broken. At last, we reach the final step. A wide chamber opens before us, silent, vast, sacred. No altar waits. No verdict is spoken. Only emptiness filled with dust spiraling in slow, incense-like patterns, as if the chamber itself is breathing. Here nothing is solved, yet something is understood, that every open door leaves a new kind of darkness behind it. And sometimes that darkness is not the end of light. Sometimes it is where the soul learns to glow. Perhaps it was never meant to be avoided. Perhaps it was only meant to be entered, slowly, gently, with reverence for what changes inside us when we finally know. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. It is said that some stories do not end. They simply move rooms. Where memory fades, yet still lingers, there's a quiet scene that could belong to any century. A candle rests beside an open book. The flame is small, patient, as if it has learned to speak softly. A window stands slightly open, and the night wind slips through it like a gentle messenger, brushing the edge of the page, lifting the air without disturbing the peace. No modern noise enters this room, only the hush of evening, only the slow, careful rhythm of breath. And beneath the silence, the myth of Pandora hums, not loudly, not insistently, but like a low drum heard through many walls, a vibration carried across time, softened by distance, yet strangely unchanged. The opening question is tender, almost personal. Why does the story still find us when the world is different, yet the heart is the same? Some believe myths survive because they are useful. Others believe they survive because they are true, not in detail, not in geography, not in literal shape, but in feeling. We explore the long echo of the vessel through art, language, and inherited fear. The phrase Pandora's box has become something people say casually, as if it were a small joke, a quick warning, a shrug. And yet, when spoken in a room like this, when heard in the presence of candlelight, it becomes a sacred relic again, worn smooth by repetition, a phrase polished by centuries of tongues, a warning carried so often it no longer feels sharp, until the night makes it sharp again. We move through time as if through corridors. In one corridor, poets are at work. They do not paint with color, they paint with breath. They shape Pandora into caution, They wrap the story in verses that sound like water over stones. In their hands, the myth becomes a hymn of consequence, the reminder that some choices cannot be unchosen. In another corridor, painters lean close to canvas. They give Pandora a face, or try to. They place her in soft light, in shadowed rooms, in scenes that feel like confession. Sometimes they make her innocent. Sometimes they make her guilty. Sometimes they make her beautiful, because beauty is often used as a frame for danger. And sometimes they paint not her at all, but the vessel, because the vessel is easier than the human heart. In another corridor, philosophers gather like quiet birds at dawn. They debate not the opening, but what remained. Hope. Was it mercy? Was it cruelty? Was it the last chain? They turn the question slowly in their hands, like a small object that refuses to be named. Their arguments echo across the centuries, because the contradiction itself feels permanent, like the sea's endless movement, like the sky's unanswering distance. Each era adds a layer, like new dust settling on old stone, like a veil laid gently over a familiar statue, and the mystery deepens into something almost sacred. If the story has been reshaped so often, what remains true? Perhaps not the details. Perhaps not whether it was a box or a jar. Perhaps not even the precise list of sorrows that escaped. But the feeling, the internal tremor, the breath held before action, the sense that certain doors, once opened, do not close the same way again. It is said that curiosity is both lantern and fire. It illuminates, it warms, and it can also burn the hand that carries it. This is the implied forbidden knowledge the myth keeps whispering, that it endures because it describes an internal human law, not an external event, a law written in the body, in the way the mind leans toward the unknown, in the way the heart reaches for what is sealed, in the way the world grows heavier after we learn something we cannot unlearn. We return to symbols, soft, meditative, suited for sleep, jars and corners, lids resting like fallen moons, thresholds worn smooth by countless feet, the small pause before a decision, the silence after. We are invited not to fear the myth as a warning sign, but to feel it as a mirror, because in every age the vessel appears again, sometimes as a secret told too soon, sometimes as a choice made in haste, sometimes as a single sentence that changes a relationship forever, and always, somewhere near the bottom, the faint shimmer of hope, whether trapped, preserved, or simply reborn, continues to flicker. We close as the candle lowers. The flame grows smaller, not from sadness, but from completion. The book is half closed, as if it does not wish to end the story entirely, only to rest it. Outside, the night wind moves again, gentle as breath, and the echo continues softly, suggesting that myths do not end. They simply change rooms, moving quietly through time like a sleepless star. Perhaps it was never meant to be finished. Perhaps it was only meant to keep finding us, in the quiet hours when the heart is ready to listen. Some voices only echo when we are ready. It is said that endings are not always doors that close. Sometimes an ending is simply a room growing quieter, until even the questions learn to lie down. Where memory fades, the chamber returns, polished stone, softened shadows, and a silence so gentle it feels like fabric. Pandora is alone beside the vessel, and the darkness around her is not hostile. It is listening. A small lamp burns nearby, its flame steady and low, as if it has decided to become a companion rather than a beacon. The light does not reach far. It does not need to. It touches only what is close, clay, dust, the edge of a threshold. No God speak. No wind surge. No judgment arrives with a trumpet. Only a quiet attention, as if the world has leaned closer to hear what remains. And on the floor rests the opening symbol, the lid. It lies there like a fallen moon, pale, chipped, collecting dust in its shallow curve. It does not look dramatic. It looks inevitable, like something that belonged to the story from the beginning, waiting for its moment to become visible. Whispers tell us that this is where we revisit the tale, not to solve it, not to sharpen its contradictions into weapons, but to lay it down carefully, like a shawl over sleeping shoulders. The vessel, once an object of consequence, becomes a sacred object of uncertainty. Jar or box, mercy or punishment, hope trapped or preserved. The story has carried all these versions the way a river carries reflections, each one true in the moment it appears, each one replaced as the light shifts. And perhaps that is the lesson of the gentle closing. That myth is not a verdict. It is a mirror. It does not tell us what to think. It shows us what we are. Some believe the most often told version is the safest one. It makes the tale neat. It gives blame a face. It turns complexity into a simple warning. But beneath the silence, we can hold the older truth with softer hands. We can acknowledge that stories change shape across centuries, and that the ache inside them stays the same. Because the ache is human. Because the vessel is not only an ancient object, it is a symbol for the moment every life eventually reaches. The moment you open something you cannot close again. Childhood becomes knowledge. A bright innocence becomes a deeper seeing. Love becomes loss, not because love fails, but because time moves like water, and water does not ask permission to pass. Dream becomes waking, and waking brings weight. Not the weight of punishment necessarily, the weight of knowing. It is said that before certain doors open, the world feels smaller, lighter, almost untouched. And then a door opens, sometimes by choice, sometimes by accident, sometimes because the world arranged it quietly, and the soul steps into a new room. A room where grief exists, where envy has a name, where fear sits near the hearth, and yet where compassion is also born, where endurance learns its slow rhythm, where kindness becomes not a decoration, but a necessity. Deep exploration becomes reflection now, moving like slow water in moonlight. Perhaps the myth was never meant to teach us to avoid curiosity. Perhaps it was meant to teach us what happens after curiosity, after the opening, after the irreversible moment, when the world cannot be returned to its earlier simplicity. Engagement tools soften into lullaby. Forbidden knowledge becomes humility. Symbolism becomes comfort. Mystery becomes a companion rather than a threat. We no longer stand before the jar as if it is an enemy. We sit beside it as if it is a witness. Hope is present again, faintly, either trapped, preserved, or simply born in the moment suffering becomes known. Not loud, not perfect, just present. Hope here is not a triumphant ending. It is a small flicker near the bottom of things. The quiet refusal to let the lamp go out entirely. The gentle decision to keep breathing even when the air feels heavy. Pandora remains still beside the vessel. And in this final movement, she does something simple. Not heroic, not dramatic. She places the lid near the mouth once more. Not sealing. Not erasing, simply honoring. Honoring the threshold that was crossed. Honoring the consequence that followed. Honoring the fact that some openings cannot be undone, and that life continues anyway. The lamp dims. The chamber quiets further. Dust rises in slow spirals, like incense offered to no-name God. And the final feeling is sacred uncertainty, that the story remains unfinished, because it lives in every breath that continues after sorrow has entered the world. Perhaps it was never meant to be concluded. Perhaps it was only meant to be carried, softly, gently, into the dark. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen.